1994, southeastern Turkey. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt stood on a barren hillside and noticed something unusual: stones protruding from the ground in a pattern that didn't match natural geology. When excavation began, his team uncovered massive T-shaped pillars carved from limestone, each weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in perfect circles and covered with intricate animal carvings. Carbon dating revealed the structures were 12,000 years old, built 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the pyramids, and most remarkably, before the development of agriculture, pottery, or metalworking. According to everything archaeologists understood about human development, this site, Göbekli Tepe, shouldn't exist. Hunter-gatherers weren't supposed to have the organization, motivation, or technical knowledge to construct monumental architecture. Yet here it was, buried deliberately under thousands of tons of rubble, preserved like a time capsule from a prehistoric world we're only beginning to understand. And halfway across the globe, in the remote highlands of Laos, another mystery waited. Over 2,000 massive stone jars, some weighing 30 tons, scattered across jungle hilltops with no clear explanation for their purpose, their creators, or how they were moved. The next 20 minutes will connect dots you didn't know existed. You'll rewatch this, guarantee it. Don't miss what's coming. Buttons right there. Right now, at this exact moment, archaeological discoveries are challenging the timeline we learned in school about when human civilization began and what our ancestors were capable of achieving. The standard narrative taught in textbooks presents a clear progression. Humans lived as simple hunter-gatherers until around 10,000 BCE, when agriculture developed in the Fertile Crescent, leading to settled communities, which eventually built the first cities and monuments around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamia. This linear model of human development has shaped our understanding of prehistory for generations. But recent excavations at sites around the world are revealing something more complex, evidence that sophisticated construction, symbolic thinking, and large-scale organization existed thousands of years earlier than previously believed, during periods when humans were supposedly living in small nomadic groups without the capacity for monumental projects. We're going to examine two archaeological sites that have sparked intense debate among researchers and forced reconsideration of prehistoric human capabilities. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where hunter-gatherers built massive stone temples before they learned to farm, raising fundamental questions about what motivated pre-agricultural societies and how they organized labor on such a scale. And the Plain of Jars in Laos, where thousands of megalithic stone vessels are scattered across remote highlands, their purpose and origins still debated by archaeologists decades after their discovery. These aren't fringe theories or speculative claims. They're excavated sites with published research, carbon dating, and ongoing scientific investigation. What makes them fascinating isn't that they prove any particular alternative history, but that they demonstrate how much we still don't understand about our past and how archaeological evidence continues to reshape our knowledge of human development. The debates surrounding these sites show how science works. New discoveries lead to new questions, and our understanding evolves as evidence accumulates. In 1994, German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt began excavating a site in southeastern Turkey that would fundamentally challenge assumptions about prehistoric societies. Göbekli Tepe, located near the modern city of Şanlıurfa, consists of massive circular structures built from T-shaped limestone pillars, each weighing between 10 and 20 tons and standing up to 18 feet tall. The pillars are covered with detailed carvings of animals: snakes, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, and wild boars, executed with remarkable skill and artistic sophistication. What makes this discovery extraordinary isn't just the craftsmanship, but the timing. Radiocarbon dating places the earliest structures at approximately 9600 BCE, during the pre-pottery Neolithic period, when humans in this region were still hunter-gatherers who hadn't yet domesticated plants or animals. According to the prevailing archaeological model before Göbekli Tepe's discovery, monumental architecture required agriculture to support the large, settled populations necessary for such projects. This site turned that assumption upside down. The excavation has revealed at least 20 circular enclosures, though only about 5% of the 22-acre site has been uncovered. Ground-penetrating radar indicates many more structures remain buried. Each enclosure contains multiple T-shaped pillars arranged in circles, with two larger pillars in the center. The pillars aren't randomly decorated. Archaeologists have identified recurring motifs and what appears to be a complex symbolic system. Some researchers, including Schmidt himself before his death in 2014, proposed that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a ritual or ceremonial center, possibly attracting groups from a wide region for gatherings that served social, religious, or astronomical purposes. The presence of animal bones at the site, predominantly from wild species like gazelles and aurochs, suggests large-scale feasting events. This has led some archaeologists to propose that ritual gatherings at sites like Göbekli Tepe may have actually catalyzed the development of agriculture, reversing the traditional cause and effect relationship. If groups were regularly congregating for ceremonies, the need to feed large numbers of people might have incentivized the cultivation of wild grains that grew nearby. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Göbekli Tepe is what happened to it. The structures weren't simply abandoned, they were deliberately buried. Excavations show that the circular enclosures were carefully filled with debris and rubble, preserving them almost perfectly. Why would the builders, or later inhabitants, invest enormous effort to bury these monuments? Archaeologists debate several possibilities. Some suggest it was a ritual act, marking the end of the site's sacred use. Others propose that as agricultural communities developed and new social structures emerged, the old ceremonial center was symbolically closed and preserved. Stanford archaeologist Ian Hodder has noted that Göbekli Tepe forces reconsideration of the Neolithic revolution, the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture, suggesting it was a more complex process than previously understood, possibly involving shifts in ideology and social organization alongside economic changes. The site raises profound questions about prehistoric cognitive and organizational capabilities. How did hunter-gatherer groups coordinate the labor required to quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton stones without domesticated animals, wheeled vehicles, or metal tools? Analysis of the quarries located on the hillside shows that the pillars were carved from bedrock using stone tools, then somehow moved to their positions in the circular structures. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that moving such stones would require dozens or even hundreds of people working in coordination. This implies either a much larger population than typically associated with hunter-gatherer bands, or cooperation between multiple groups, suggesting social complexity and organizational systems that predate agriculture. Researchers continue to debate what motivated this massive investment of labor. Was it religious devotion, astronomical observation, territorial marking? Each excavation season brings new data, but many fundamental questions remain unanswered. Göbekli Tepe stands as evidence that prehistoric humans possessed sophisticated symbolic thinking, artistic ability, and organizational capacity thousands of years before they built the first cities, challenging us to reconsider what we thought we knew about the capabilities of pre-agricultural societies. But while Göbekli Tepe challenges our understanding of when monumental construction began, another site on the opposite side of Asia raises equally perplexing questions. Not about temples, but about thousands of massive stone vessels scattered across remote jungle highlands. Their purpose and creators still debated after nearly a century of research. In the remote highlands of northern Laos, across the provinces of Xiengkhouang and Huafan, over 2,000 massive stone jars are scattered across dozens of sites covering hundreds of square miles. The jars range from 1 to 3 meters in height, with the largest weighing up to 30 tons. They're carved from various types of stone: granite, sandstone, limestone, and conglomerate rock, each hollowed out from a single block. Some have carved lids, though most are open to the sky. The jars were first documented by French researcher Madeleine Colani in the 1930s, and they've puzzled archaeologists ever since. Despite decades of research, fundamental questions remain. Who made them? When were they created? How were they moved to their current locations? And most intriguingly, what were they for? Carbon dating of human remains and artifacts found at jar sites places their use somewhere between 500 BCE and 500 CE during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age in Southeast Asia. However, dating the jars themselves is more challenging. Unlike organic materials, stone cannot be carbon dated, so archaeologists rely on analyzing associated artifacts, burial goods, and sediment layers. Some researchers propose the jars are much older than the human remains found inside them, suggesting they were created in an earlier period and later reused by different cultures. The jars show significant weathering and geological erosion, which some geologists argue indicates they've been exposed to the elements for thousands of years. This age uncertainty is one of the site's enduring mysteries. Without definitive dating methods for the stone itself, estimates vary widely, and archaeologists continue to debate whether the jars were made 2,500 years ago or potentially much earlier. Kalani's original theory, based on her 1930s excavations, proposed that the jars were used in a complex funerary practice she called distillation of the dead. According to this interpretation, bodies were placed inside the jars to decompose, after which the remains were cremated and the bones placed in ceramic vessels for final burial. Her team found human bones, teeth, ash, stone tools, bronze objects, and glass beads inside several jars, supporting the mortuary use hypothesis. However, subsequent excavations have complicated this picture. Not all jars contain human remains. Many are completely empty and show no signs of ever being used. Australian archaeologist Dougal O'Reilly, who has conducted extensive research at the Plain of Jars since 2016, discovered burial pits located near jar sites where bodies were buried in traditional graves. If people had graves, why create massive stone jars? The inconsistency of evidence has led some researchers to propose alternative or additional uses: grain storage, fermentation vessels for rice wine, water collection, or ceremonial functions unrelated to burial. The logistics of creating and transporting the jars remain deeply puzzling. Geological analysis has traced several jars to quarries located in mountainous regions miles from the sites where they now stand. At one quarry site, researchers found partially finished jars still attached to the bedrock, providing insight into the manufacturing process, but raising further questions about how finished jars, some weighing as much as 30 tons, were moved across rugged terrain without wheels, metal tools, or draft animals. The jars aren't randomly scattered. They're arranged in clusters, sometimes forming patterns or alignments that some researchers suggest may have astronomical significance, though this remains speculative. Some jar sites are positioned on hilltops with commanding views of the surrounding valleys, while others are located in more sheltered positions. The intentionality of these placements is clear, but the reasoning behind it remains a subject of debate. Recent scientific analysis has added new dimensions to the mystery. Researchers have found high concentrations of iron oxide in soil samples from certain jar sites, a finding that some scientists associate with exposure to intense heat. This has led to speculation about whether the jars were subjected to high temperatures during their use, perhaps in cremation rituals, as Kalani proposed, or whether geological processes are responsible. Additionally, ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR surveys have revealed that many more jars likely remain buried or hidden beneath jungle vegetation, suggesting the true scope of the phenomenon is larger than currently documented. The Plain of Jars suffered extensive damage during the Vietnam War when the region was heavily bombed. Many jars were destroyed, and unexploded ordnance still makes some sites dangerous to access, limiting archaeological investigation. Local Lao legends offer a different narrative. Stories passed down through generations describe the jars as drinking vessels used by giants after a great battle, or as containers for storing rice wine prepared for celebrations by mythical rulers. While archaeologists don't interpret these legends literally, some researchers note that oral traditions sometimes preserve kernels of historical memory, distorted over centuries. The giants might represent a people who seemed powerful to later inhabitants, or the legends might encode cultural memories of the jar maker's impressive capabilities. Regardless of their literal accuracy, these stories reflect how the jars have captured human imagination for generations. Massive, enigmatic monuments created by someone, for some purpose, in a time beyond living memory. The Plain of Jars exemplifies how archaeological mysteries persist, not because of lack of investigation, but because of incomplete evidence and the limitations of our methods. Archaeologists continue to excavate, analyze, and debate, proposing theories based on available data while acknowledging significant gaps in understanding. What we can say with confidence is that a culture with considerable organizational capacity, stoneworking skills, and specific motivations, whether religious, practical, or both, created these monuments. What we cannot yet say with certainty is exactly when, why, or how. The jars remain silent and enigmatic, awaiting new technologies, new excavations, and new insights that might finally reveal their secrets. And that uncertainty, that gap between what we've found and what we understand, is precisely what makes archaeology so compelling, a discipline constantly confronting the limits of knowledge while methodically working to expand them. We didn't just examine two archaeological sites, we explored two windows into periods of human history that remain incompletely understood, where physical evidence challenges previous assumptions and forces reconsideration of what prehistoric peoples were capable of achieving. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that monumental construction and sophisticated symbolic thinking existed before agriculture, contradicting the traditional model of the Neolithic Revolution and raising fundamental questions about social organization in hunter-gatherer societies. The Plain of Jars reveals that megalithic construction occurred in Southeast Asia during the Late Bronze or Early Iron Age, or possibly earlier, but the purpose, methods, and cultural context remain subjects of ongoing debate and investigation. These sites don't prove any particular alternative narrative of human history. Instead, they illustrate something more valuable: the scientific process in action, where new discoveries generate new questions, old theories get revised or discarded, and our understanding evolves based on accumulating evidence. And here's what makes these discoveries significant for the present. Archaeologists are actively working to understand them. Excavations at Göbekli Tepe continue each summer, with new enclosures uncovered and new data collected that gradually builds a more complete picture of the site's chronology, function, and cultural context. Researchers debate whether it was primarily religious, astronomical, social, or some combination of purposes. At the Plain of Jars, scientists employ increasingly sophisticated methods: LiDAR surveys, isotopic analysis of skeletal remains, geological sourcing of stone, to piece together who made the jars, when they were created, and what they were used for. The scientific community remains divided on many interpretations, but that division reflects healthy debate as researchers follow evidence and test hypotheses. This isn't about conspiracy or hidden knowledge. It's about the challenging, meticulous work of archaeology, where answers often take decades to emerge, and some questions remain open for generations. What makes these sites compelling isn't that they reveal everything about the past, but that they show how much remains unknown. Göbekli Tepe was only discovered in the 1990s, and only 5% has been excavated, meaning 95% of the site still lies underground, potentially holding evidence that could further transform our understanding of the Neolithic period. The Plain of Jars has been studied since the 1930s, yet fundamental questions about age, purpose, and cultural origin remain unanswered, largely because the right dating methods or analytical techniques may not yet exist. These are reminders that human history is far longer and more complex than the few thousand years of written records. Entire chapters of our past remain blank or fragmentary, waiting for future discoveries, new technologies, and careful scientific investigation to fill in the details. These debates show how much our understanding of prehistory continues to evolve. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe forced archaeologists to reconsider the relationship between sedentism, agriculture, and monumental architecture, core questions about how human societies developed. The Plain of Jars challenges us to think about megalithic traditions in regions often overshadowed by more famous sites in Europe or the Middle East, revealing that impressive stoneworking occurred globally in various contexts. The stones themselves haven't changed. They've been there for thousands of years. What's changed is our awareness of them and our scientific capacity to study them. And as methods improve, better dating techniques, DNA analysis, satellite imagery, 3D modeling, Sites that have puzzled researchers for decades may finally yield their secrets. The scientific method demands we follow evidence, acknowledge uncertainty, and revise theories when new data emerges. That's not weakness. It's how knowledge advances. Göbekli Tepe and the Plain of Jars aren't puzzles with simple solutions hidden from view. They're complex archaeological sites requiring patient, systematic investigation, where each excavation season brings incremental progress toward understanding. Researchers worldwide are working on these questions, publishing findings, debating interpretations, and slowly building a more accurate picture of what these sites represent and what they tell us about human capabilities in prehistoric times. If you're interested in learning more, academic journals like Antiquity, World Archaeology, and site-specific publications from institutions like the German Archaeological Institute provide detailed peer-reviewed research on both locations. This is just the beginning of what archaeology continues to reveal about our past. In future videos, we'll explore other discoveries that challenge conventional timelines and expand our understanding of ancient cultures, examining evidence with the same careful, critical approach that scientists use. Subscribe so you don't miss when we investigate other sites where ongoing research is reshaping what we know about human history. Turn on notifications because new archaeological discoveries emerge constantly, each one adding pieces to the incomplete puzzle of our past. These sites waited thousands of years to be found. The investigation continues,